wanted to start actually with a story, and the story comes from last year. In the work that I do, a lot of my interactions are with young people anywhere from age 17 to their mid-40s. That's the population that I get the privilege of working with. And last year I was in the process of selecting fellows for the Bronfman Youth Fellowships, and I interviewed a young man. And in many ways, he would fit into a category in Pew that seems to be a completely safe category. What I mean by that is he has two Jewish parents, highly Jewishly engaged parents, and he went to day school until he was in 6th grade. He went to Jewish summer camp. And then he went from 6th grade, and at the time I met him initially, he was in 11th grade. Then he went on to a wonderful private all-boys school with a very strong tradition of ethics and values. And he sat down in front of me and he said, my big question is, essentially, why be Jewish? I've just spent the past few years in an ethically, morally rich environment that is not specifically Jewish, and all of a sudden I realized that people were telling me that Jewish values are so unique, and Jewish values are something that others don't hold. And I went into, quote unquote, the real world beyond the Jewish environment he'd been in, and I wonder, why be Jewish? And I took that as an opportunity, and I take that as an opportunity every time those kinds of conversations happen, not to bemoan that question, but to welcome that question. Because I think that we need to find ways to be a lot more open to questions from young Jews from all different backgrounds, so that they can gain a sense of confidence and understanding of what is the purpose of Jewish life today. How can it be not only meaningful for them in a consumerist way? I'm not suggesting that meaning is a one-way street, but meaning in a sense of belonging, meaning in the sense of having a story that you're a part of. And I think there's an opportunity here. I was most struck, and I know that there's a lot of questions about parts of how the data came out, but to me, the data that relates to Jewish pride is something from which we can build on. And I recognize that it's a lot of work to build on people who say, I feel proud to be Jewish, but I don't go to a Passover Seder. I feel proud to be Jewish, but I don't belong to a synagogue. I feel proud to be Jewish, but I don't speak Hebrew. I recognize that all of those are barriers, and those are challenges, and they're real. And I think we have to double down on a lot of really wonderful efforts that are out there already that are aiming at intensive Jewish education. I'm going to give one example, and then I think I've probably talked, at least initially, a little too long, I don't know. And that is that I have seen a really wonderful increase in rethinking of the Hebrew school model, the Sunday school model. And there are some things that I've been seeing across the country, not just in cutting edge areas in the New York area, although I think New York is leading the way on this, but programs where there are full-time Hebrew school teachers, programs where those Hebrew school teachers are working individually with students in smaller cohorts, so that there's really a community that's being built for those young people. Hebrew immersion after-school programs, Hebrew immersion opportunities, and using technology to do some of that. Hebrew schools that actually take the opportunity to say that for some people, Jewish identity is not a religious identity. There's programs that are aimed at cultural Jewish identity that's rich and deep, and that's not simple. I sometimes wish that we had our Yiddish culture and a focus on Jewish intellectualism that would allow us to say there's something that's holding people to a cultural Jewish identity. But I think there are places where we're seeing more of that emerge. And I think that the question of no religion Jews is a question that we need to address in a positive way.
My takeaways from Pew, to some extent, overlap with Becky's, to some extent, differ radically. First and foremost, Pew needs to be a wake-up call for Jewish leadership. In other words, if the study does nothing but say, okay, let's move on, it has failed miserably. It provides us with a very rich database, without question. It provides food for lectures and popular seminars. People, as Rabbi Tucker said, there'll be Rabbi Pew in the future, Rav Pew in the future, who'll be quoted unceasingly. But if that's all it does, it essentially is a wasted moment in time. Pew should be a call to the Jewish community to say it cannot be business as usual. The Herculean efforts that have been made to promote Jewish continuity over the last 25 years have not turned things around. The toll of assimilation is far greater than any of us imagined, and certainly any of us wish to see. The day after Pew was released, a past president of AJC happened to approach me and said, "Well, you should be smiling today." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you've been vindicated. Everything you've been saying for the last 25 years has just been proven to be true in data." And I said, "No, when you lose 2.1 million Jews over that 25-year period, there's no cause for celebration, no matter how many times you may be proven right. Pew, first and foremost, needs to be a wake-up call. My concern is that it's not. That the circles of Jewish leadership that I travel in, by and large, are saying, yes, Pew is important, assimilation is important, but let's move on to the next subject. If anything, what ails us internally as Jews is a far more divisive crisis, number one, but in the long term, a much more threatening crisis than the kind of external dangers that we confront on a daily basis. Second, I do want to pick up on Becky's point about the 94% Jewish pride. I think there's another side to that really needs to be embedded in the consciousness of American Jews. Why is that 94% figure significant? It's a statement of there's no need for embarrassment about Jewish identity in American society. Never in Jewish history, in diaspora Jewish history certainly, has there been a society so welcoming and so valuing of Jewish participation and Jewish expression. The reason 94% say they're proud to be Jewish doesn't mean, as Becky pointed out, that they're active about it or actually doing anything about it. She may see it as an opportunity, and perhaps it is. But to me, the most important thing about it, which Jews often either underrate or take for granted, is that America has been welcoming of Jewish participation, of Jewish identification, of Jewish expression. Again, the conversation inside the Jewish beltway, if you will, is about, well, BDS is happening on campus. Or some preacher in the South just made a terrible statement about Christology and the need to convert Jews. Yeah, those things happen from time to time. They are not normative of mainstream America. Mainstream America values Jews enormously. In terms of the data regarding Israel, attitudes towards Israel remain overwhelmingly supportive by mainstream America. Jews should, number one, not undervalue it, and number two, say, if that's the case, let's spend more time on enriching ourselves as Jews and less time worrying about how welcome we are in America. Third, Becky made the observation of the Jews by religion and Jews without religion. Without question, the fastest growing group among all Jewish expressions is the so-called nones, the N-O-N-E-S, those Jews without religion. Some have suggested this means that there's a secular Jewish identity that is waiting to be energized. I wish I saw it. It's not the case. Jews without religion, by and large, are not interested in secular Jewish identity, let alone religious Jewish identity. The sad truth about Pew is that so many of our people are Jewishly indifferent. Again, it doesn't mean that they need to be written off. There probably are things that could be done to engage them in one form or another. But those of us who see Pew as everything is going fine, and yes, there are some Jews who are religious, with whom the synagogue speaks to them, and others for whom secular Jewish identity speaks to them. No, secular Jewishness meant something when it meant people who read Yiddish literature and campaigned for the Bund. I unfortunately don't do either one of those things, but there are many aspects of secularism that does appeal to me. But that said, that generation for whom secularism was an ideology, you may find it in Israel, and to some extent you still do. In American Jewry, American Judaism, it simply is non-existent. Secular Jewish identity is a prescription, with some exceptions, obviously, but is a prescription for Jewish indifference. Fourthly, we haven't said anything about the ascending orthodoxy. This is probably the single greatest demographic change that was unexpected in Pew. That trend will continue. Orthodox Jews today are, roughly speaking, 22% of the affiliated Jewish population. They're only about 10%, 12% of the overall population, but in terms of active Jews, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 are Orthodox. That's a trend that will continue in the future because the Orthodox birth rate is literally more than twice the conservative Reform birth rate. you will see a greater Orthodox presence. For some Orthodox Jews, it means triumphalism. For others, it means an opportunity to engage the community. Which of those trends is going to prevail? That's very much up for grabs in the future. And last, the single most divisive aspect about Pew, or the single most divisive theme within Pew, are the findings regarding mixed marriage. Again, there's very little good news here. Mixed marriage rates have continued to increase. They're now at 58% for Jews who have married since the year 2000. The percentage of Jews who raise their children only as Jews among mixed marriages has fallen to 20%, as compared to it was 30% just a mere 14 years ago. While conversion, the Pew data has not been released fully regarding conversion, but everyone's in agreement, conversion has fallen, so that the drive for conversion has lessened the more mixed marriage has become acceptable. If you're looking outside of Orthodoxy, the mixed marriage rate among non-Orthodox Jews is actually 72%. That suggests that almost 3 in 4 people getting married today who are not Orthodox are choosing Gentile spouses without conversion. Regardless of how we perceive mixed marriage, certainly is a reflection again of the acceptability of being Jewish in America. It suggests anti-Semitism is not a major danger to American Jewry. But regardless how we perceive mixed marriage as providing some inroads of Jewish acceptance on the one hand, and maybe we'll pick up some converts on the other, or at the very least, we'll try to preserve the children. Let's realize that the overall trajectory, the overall portrait, has not been a happy story here. What's going to happen in the future? Again, if the 20% could somehow be increased to 50%, mixed marriage would not be a problem. It might be a theological problem for many, but it would suggest that there are no losses to mixed marriage. But the percentage has been going the other way. As mixed marriage has become more acceptable, the tendency has been to raise children either as both Jewish and Christian, no religion at all, or Jewish partly by ethnicity. Those are not good prescriptions for Jewish continuity. Whether they're good prescriptions theologically, I leave that to others to pursue. But in terms of where the future of the Jewish community is going, a Jewish community that is so ambivalent or ambiguous about its Jewish identity is not one can rely on in terms of the future.
Becky, I want to ask you, and I want to pick up on the 94% Jewish pride and the 58% intermarriage, and maybe put them together on the somewhat sanguine question Steve spoke to a little bit, and certainly he may want to follow up. But what are the implications of these mixed marriage percentages and numbers for the future of Jewish continuity?
So one of the things I actually want to circle back a little bit to what you just said, Stephen, around secular Jewish identity and that it's a prescription for Jewish indifference. And one of the things that I think everyone sitting in this audience knows is that not every person who you engage with who's Jewish is turned on by the religious side of Judaism. And this is the case, I think, for any family. I look at my aunts and my uncles, some became more observant, some became less, but the value of having forms of Jewish expression that are meaningful, that are not all through a religious or specifically religious lens, is something that has been an option, I would say, for Jewish existence, and it's something that we've seen. Certainly, maybe the height of it, at least in our times, has been in Yiddish culture, which is not there right now. Israeli secular Jewish identity is something that is a place where there's a resurgence of recapturing certain elements of tradition, and something that's quite interesting is when you think about, I recently read Ari Shavit's book, My Promised Land, which I highly recommend, and he really depicts the story of the Chalutzim. And if I think back to a group of young Jews who decided to say, I have no religion, I want a secular identity, but I want a cause and a vision, of course, those young people come to mind. When you now look at their grandchildren, some of them have absolutely no connection to their Jewish identity in Israel, other than feeling Israeli, and they really see a distinction between those. But some of them still practice in a non-religious way many Jewish customs and practices without realizing or without feeling as though it's required in a religious context. And this is one of the things, this is connected to your question, Stuart. This is one of the things that I think we have a real opportunity to recapture, which is the Jewish people and Jewish tradition does life cycles, ritual, experiences of meaning through symbolic gestures, through support, in a way that no other community does. Recently, someone told me a story about a friend of theirs who said, who's not Jewish, has no Jewish relatives whatsoever, and who said to them, I remember when your mother, the anniversary of your mother passing, you lit a candle. What is that all about? And so this friend explained the Yahrzeit candle. And this non-Jewish person said, I want to do that because I have no tradition that allows me to commemorate yearly when a loved one dies. The reason I bring that up is because I think that most couples, when they have the opportunity to be welcomed into the conversation about the way that Jewish ritual can make their wedding meaningful, make their child's birth meaningful, when they have the opportunity to start to explore those things, it has a real potential. And it's not always a religious experience, but there's traditions that don't always have to be connected religiously. I know for a lot of people that's not the case, but for many people that certainly does resonate. And it's one of the things that I think allows Jewish pride. You know, one of the stats in the data talks about Judaism accepting non-belief of God. Judaism has a long tradition of accepting doubt, accepting questioning, having argumentation. And those are things that the wider population and younger people are proud of. And when they marry someone who's not Jewish, particularly if that person is a lapsed Catholic or a lapsed Protestant or a lapsed Muslim or whatever they might be, they actually, if they have a sense of confidence in their Jewish identity, when they marry someone who is not Jewish, they have the opportunity to share all of these wonderful pieces of what it means to bring Judaism into their home. And the reason I think that conversion and pushing conversion is problematic is that people want to be accepted for who they are. And this is, of course, a very American thing that I'm saying, and perhaps not how the Jewish community used to operate. But people want to be welcomed in to be who they are, to walk in the door fully, freely to be who they are, and then they'll get to know what Jewish community and what Jewish life has to offer. And when there's a price of admission of saying you can no longer bring your background, your parents' story, and whatever else into the equation, for the non-Jewish spouse, that's usually a non-starter. For some people, it's not an issue, but for many, many, it really is. And I really believe that this is one of the things that intermarriage is asking us to do, is to once again examine and reinvent and discuss, not make up, but discuss the things that make Jewish life meaningful and enriching, and to share that with people. And I'm not talking about you have to sell it, this isn't a marketing gimmick, but to really be able to share that with couples. And I'll say one last thing here, which is recently I was talking to some young women in their late 20s, and they're engaged to individuals who have one Jewish parent, so some level of a questionable Jewish identity. And in both cases, these young women were afraid to tell the rabbi that they were speaking to about wedding them the exact story of how their spouse is or isn't Jewish, because they had a fear of authority, essentially, that somebody's going to tell them they're a bad Jew or not good enough Jew, and they're not going to be able to get the rabbi to marry them. And I think that that's a worry and that's a problem. And I'm not suggesting that every rabbi needs to marry somebody who's not Jewish, but I would love it if rabbis who aren't interested in doing that because of denominational and halachic reasons, to be able to refer people to other rabbis and Jewish professionals who would be willing to help make meaning in an interfaith couple's life at the start of their life.
Becky raises some interesting issues here. Let me try to unpack a couple of them. I'm not speaking as someone who is, on the one hand, I'm not a secular Jew, but that's almost irrelevant at this point. I am speaking as someone who does value secular Jewish identity historically. I've taught courses that began with Spinoza and ended up with Yehuda Amichai. And my test of what is a serious secular Jew is someone who will have some interest in those currents and will say, gee, those are some interesting ways of expressing Jewish identity. I think Becky's absolutely correct that there's more happening in Israel today that is encouraging along those lines than, say, 10 or 15 years ago. The late Charles Liebman, one of my mentors, used to argue that there are two forms of Israeli secularism. There's an Israeli secularism that is basically a culture of Yiddishkeit. They don't use the word because they don't know the Yiddish, but what they want is a Jewish culture that is distinctively not religious. And Charles Liebman, a deeply religious Jew, argued that he was more than happy with that. His problem was with a relatively small percentage of the population, about 10%, for whom being Jewish meant nothing at all. And that second form of secularism he regarded as dangerous. One of the reasons he thought it was dangerous is that it often represented Israeli intellectual elites, meaning the people who dominate the universities, the think tanks, the media. But he said that's really only about 10% of Israeli secularism. In America, I'd venture to say that statistics are exact opposite. You've got a tiny percentage, maybe 10% at the most, for whom secularism is a serious expression of Jewish identity. Those are the people that are going to discuss Heinrich Heine. Much larger percentage of secularism is people who say, I'm not religious. Those are the JNRs, the Jews of no religion. On every score, they come across as indifferent. I'll share with you one piece of data along these lines. One would think that a secular Jew has no interest in the synagogue, but he would be interested in secular Jewish organizations that make no religious demands of them whatsoever. Well, among Jews who are Jews by religion, 18% have some membership in a secular Jewish organization, Hadassah, B'nai B'rith, any of the JCCs, any of the grassroots Jewish organizations. Among secular Jews, Jews of no religion, it's 4%. Remember, these are secular Jewish organizations that are obviously not succeeding with them. I happen to think also that in America, we're talking about a majority Christian culture and a minority Jewish one. Therefore, the odds on a secular culture that is going to somehow or other go along with America, yet remain distinct from it, are much larger than the odds are in Israel. So again, look, I study diaspora Jewry generally. I wish I found secular expressions that, whether I agree with them or not, is quite irrelevant. Here, Becky's absolutely correct. But the question is whether they're sustaining. Right now, I'm skeptical about how sustaining they are. Second theme, Becky raises the issue of conversion, and she offers a rather novel approach to it, namely that conversion does not accept people the way they are. It accepts them on the basis of their becoming something else. And that is distinctively un-American. It's distinctively countercultural to America. No question about that. Her description is absolutely correct. We found in the same breath, an important study by Sylvia Fishman at Brandeis University, that rabbis today are afraid to talk about conversion, lest they prove offensive to mixed marrieds in the pews. When a conversion is not encouraged by the Jewish side of the family, and here, by the way, the late Egon Meyer was a champion of mixed marrieds, but even his research conceded, if the Jewish side of the family does not bring conversion, and the Jewish side of the community does not bring conversion to the fore, it's simply not going to happen. So that in the well-intentioned desire to keep people on board, meet them where they are, not where you want them to be, recognize that one of the important themes here of conversion to Judaism as the best outcome to a mixed marriage has fallen by the wayside. That's not good news for the future of American Jewry.
If we have this significant issue in terms of mixed marriage and religiosity, if you will, and we focus for a minute on non-religious expressions of Judaism, I think many in the room would agree that something that might rise to the top of that list would be support for the State of Israel. The Pew study speaks to the fact that Jews over 50, when asked if they believe the U.S. has been too supportive of Israel, only 5% say yes. But when you ask that same question to Jews under the age of 30, whether the U.S. has been too supportive of Israel, 35% say yes. So in light of statistics like that and this religious versus non-religious gulf, what do you think that the future of American Jewish support for Israel is indicated in the Pew study, particularly among young people?
There are two basic reasons for distancing from Israel among young people. In fairness, by the way, my friends at Brandeis tell me there's no distancing whatsoever. It's just a matter of age. In other words, they'll get more committed to Israel as they grow older. By the time they reach age 50, they'll be saying America is insufficiently supportive of Israel. I respond to them by saying, I learned a long time ago, don't engage in leaps of faith. Don't look at data and say, that's the way I want it to be. Historians often pretend that they go back in history and they say, That's the history I would have liked to have been part of. That's already taken place. The future is very much up for grabs. And to say that, let things taking its natural course, young people will be as supportive of Israel as their elders over the course of time, that's an incredible leap of faith. So I'm not prepared to stake my marbles on that. But I do think there are two other reasons for the distancing of Israel, and both of them need to be confronted. Number one is that in the culture of young people today, I'd like to hear Becky's comments on this in a second, but in the culture of young people today, the language of occupation, it's a theme, it's a word, it's a phenomenon that simply does not resonate with young people. If anything, it's alienating to young people. Israel is engaged in a quest for a two-state solution. That's the major change again in the last 25 years. 25 years ago, Arik Sharon and others were saying there will never be a Palestinian state. Even Yitzhak Rabin said there will never be a Palestinian state. The major change that's taken place in Israeli culture has been this endorsement of a two-state solution as absolutely necessary for Israel's future survival as a Jewish state. Young people do not remember the time when there were those of us who were busy saying, if you don't confront the reality of demographics, you will no longer have a Jewish state. Therefore, they see Israel as possessing territory that others want or others claim the right to, and therefore they see Israel as an occupying power. And Arik Sharon did say it very well. Face the facts. Occupation is occupation. You can dress it up in many different ways, but it remains an occupation. As long as the peace process goes nowhere, you can expect that the distancing from Israel will take place among a small percentage of young people who are visible and vocally active. Frankly, I'm less concerned about them, notwithstanding the fact they will grab the headlines. Jewish Week editorial this week addresses it. They'll always grab the headlines. The reason I'm less concerned is that antagonism to Israel, criticism of Israel, open discussion about Israel can be engaged. To some extent, by the way, it's a reflection of how deeply they may care. So therefore, those who are vocal in expressions about Israel that may not be mine, I'm fully prepared to engage. But the second form of distancing, I think, is far more pernicious. And that's the distancing from matters Jewish generally. That's what I call the toll of assimilation. By definition, is going to wreak its price, exact its price in terms of commitment to Israel. The trouble there is I can't engage them anymore. In other words, Jewishly indifferent, Israel indifferent, I won't even have the opportunity to talk about these things. So in that respect, I am concerned about future support for the state of Israel. I'm less concerned about those who are currently expressing criticism of Israeli policy, because I think the dialogue will continue, and to some extent I think over time, number one, the facts on the ground may change, and there may be a two-state solution, even if I can't see it right now. Number two is that as people engage those issues, they learn more. Their hostility level may even rise in the short term, but that's a reflection only of how deeply they're involved with it. So I'm less concerned about that. Jewish indifference, on the other hand, I think that's the real weak link. That's the real Achilles heel in the pro-Israel community.
So here I think we agree on a lot. I also am concerned about the relationship that young Jews feel towards Israel. But I'm also concerned about the relationship that young Israelis feel towards Israel. There is a growing number of young people in Israel who are also questioning what the heck they're doing there. And what I mean by that is they find themselves in a very uncomfortable position when they're stationed in army roles that require them to protect settlers who they don't agree with. And I want to bring that up because I think that this is a bigger issue across the board, which is Israel's behavior does matter to young Jews, whether they're in Israel or whether they're Americans. And we really do have an opportunity here to have a voice on some of the issues that are upsetting. The Pew study showed that 69% of people who responded said that Judaism is about leading an ethical life, or 56% said it's about fighting for justice. And something that I hear young American Jews talk about, particularly those who have not grown up in Orthodox or day school environments, and I'm making a genuine distinction there, is that they're proud of a kind of Judaism that protects those who are weaker. They're proud of a Judaism that is engaged with the world and with social justice. And they find themselves tongue-tied when it comes to Israel because they don't know how to justify the way that, as you said, occupation is a challenging thing, and there are challenges to Israel. Now, in the work that I do, we try and encourage young people to have those conversations because what we believe is exactly as you just said, there's love underlying that angst, and that there's an opportunity when you open up a space for conversation for young people to work through some of that and also to perhaps advocate on those issues. I want to applaud Stephen here and also the AJC for the work that you're doing in leading the charge around questions of how Israel handles personal status issues, things like marriage and divorce and conversion, and the way that the Rabbanut has a stranglehold on that entire endeavor. For many young Jews who are engaged in the reform movement, who are patrilineal Jews, they have gone to Israel, had a wonderful experience, but felt this is not the place where their kind of Judaism is valued. And this is a challenge. I certainly believe that Israel has many, many places where their kind of Judaism can be valued, but in an official sense, the operations and the way that the Rabbanut and the government act needs to take into account those implications for young Jews in America. And the other thing, though, that I want to bring up here, and I don't know the stats, and maybe you do, but we have had this huge rise in the number of young Jews who are getting opportunities to experience Israel. Birthright, Masa, which is a program for more immersive experiences and provides a stipend for students who want to do that. And I think we don't know yet what that experience and how that experience will play out over time, because I think that sometimes in the first instance of encountering Israel, it bubbles up to the surface a lot of challenges and ambivalence and tongue-tie, and yet I wonder if in the future that may also help the relationship between Israel and America. But I think that the Israeli government and its actions are something that need to be really understood as having implications for American Jewish connection.
Three very quick points. First of all, again, just to underscore what Becky said, occupation is occupation. I don't think there's any sugarcoating it, and frankly, Sharon's greatest transformation was that he changed the language, precisely this. He said, call a spade a spade. He was bitterly criticized by his right-wing friends and colleagues who had supported him for decades. But he said, this is the reality. Occupation is occupation. We can't pretend it's anything else. But number two, I think the discussions Becky is talking about are very healthy, but there's one other context in which they need to be placed, and that is, what is Israel up against? I'm the last person who's going to defend everything Israel has ever done, but I think many of these issues cannot be understood outside of the context of continued rejection of Israel's right to exist. Now, that is something that is empirically evident. It's evident anytime you go to Hamas, or anytime you look at any of their public statements. But frankly, in terms of the Palestinian Authority as well, they simply can't seem to bring themselves to recognizing Israel as a permanent entity within the region. So in that respect, the chief obstacle to peace, I don't believe, are settlements. I'm going to get to settlements in a second. The chief objection to peace, the chief obstacle, I think, continues to be Palestinian rejectionism. That's why there was no Palestinian state in 1948 when there could have been. No Palestinian state in 1978 when they signed the Camp David Accords that called for Palestinian state within 5 years. No Palestinian state in 2000 when a Palestinian state was openly proposed by Barak, nor in 2008 when Olmert went even further. So the discussions about Israel, I think, are very significant, but they also do need to be contextualized in terms of what Israel is up against. Lastly, in terms of criticism of Israel, again, I do want to make it very clear that the Prime Minister himself has said, and AJC has certainly said, in the context of a peace agreement, some settlements will have to go. Now, that is a major statement. How many people, it's all going to be incredibly messy. But there's no question the commitment is there for the uprooting of certain settlements. Some will be retained. There'll be land swaps, to use President Obama's formulation. I'm waiting for any of this to happen. I'm not going to stake my life savings on it. not to be that much to stake in any case, but were I to stake my life savings on it, I'd be cautious. But that said, I think the main change has been this consensual position that Israel cannot continue as a Jewish state absent a two-state solution. I wish I saw it on the horizon. I don't see it right now.
I want to combine this issue of the support for the state of Israel and the demographic information in Pew regarding lack of engagement, increased assimilation, secular Judaism, and ask what implication that has for the sort of minority politics that certainly AJC tries to engage in, and the continued political influence in the United States.
There is good news in Pew. The good news basically is that I was wrong, and I wasn't alone in being wrong. But frankly, I and many others predicted a serious decline in the Jewish population 20 years ago. When the 1990 population study came out, I said, well, we're at 5.5 million, but given current trends, we're likely to dip below 5 million, maybe 4.5 million in the next 20 years. Well, it's 24 years later, and the official Pew statistics is that the 6.7 million Jews, if you disregarded the million Jews who are partly Jewish, partly something else, say you disregard them completely, you're still left with 5.8 million Jews. That means zero decline and some growth over a 25-year period. I was recently somewhat embarrassed. Charles Krauthammer, a very prominent columnist, back in 1992-93, he interviewed me for one of his essays in the Weekly Standard, and he said, I predicted that the Jewish population will decline by 10-15% in the next 20 years. He just reprinted the column in his latest book. It's called Things That Matter, and that column cites me precisely, and I said, how did I ever possibly say that? I was articulating the wisdom of the time. I was wrong, and I'm happy to have been wrong. There has been zero decline. What does that mean in terms of Jewish political influence? There are three distinct bases for Jewish political influence, and again, frankly, I don't see them disappearing right now. One is the vagaries of the American Electoral College system, which rewards Jewish populations that live in key electoral states, which is where most Jews live, whether it's New York, California, Florida, Massachusetts, New Jersey. In other words, heavy Jewish concentration in states with large number of electoral votes maximizes the political influence that Jews have. If Jews lived in Utah, which had three electoral votes, or Alaska, then we'd be in a much more difficult situation. But the fact that Jews live in these key electoral states maximizes Jewish leverage. And add to that the fact that Jews do vote. Americans don't. In a hotly contested election such as 2000, less than 50% of Americans voted for either Gore or Bush. Among Jews, it's 80 to 85%. That will continue, and in that respect, Jewish political influence, I don't think has declined numerically. Secondly, we live in a democracy. In democracy, elections cost money. You need a base of donors. In that respect, Jewish economic influence is something sometimes we're not all that comfortable talking about, but it's quite real. Major parties look to major Jewish donors. Thirdly, what we're most, I think, comfortable talking about is the power of Jewish ideas. So much of the political discourse in this country is both on the right-hand side of the equation and the left-hand side of the equation, is articulated by Jewish writers. That's a good idea, thanks. Okay. Jewish writers, Jewish intellectuals, Jewish columnists. In that respect, no serious political leader is going to ignore where the Jewish minority stands politically. So I think the good news in the Pew Report is actually that I don't foresee right now any significant diminution in Jewish political influence. Again, what will happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we'll have to wait for another Pew study for that.
So a few things just to follow on from that. One is that I've seen a number of young people get engaged on certain specific niche issues. So, for example, the Farm Bill that was recently discussed. There were several organizations, Jewish organizations, that worked on that issue, and used a community organizing mindset, and community organizing mindsets understand that you are most powerful when you work through constituencies. And they really said, let's have a Jewish voice on this issue. This is a Jewish issue. And I think the reframing of what are Jewish issues, which I think AJC has done for a very long time, is appealing to young people and is something that they want more of. But on the flip side, I'll give an example in the context of social justice work. I was talking to a group of college students who all of them are heavily involved in service initiatives on their campus. And they said to me that they were just baffled why their Hillel was trying to have them do service through Hillel. And their main reason was that the organization on campus that was engaging on service was excellent and did a wonderful job at bringing together students as volunteers to serve. So why does the Jewish community need to do that? And I bring that up because I think that the idea of excellence, and I think, for example, a place like AJC that has a reputation for excellent research and excellent convenings, those kinds of things are appealing to young people. They may not actually be walking in the door just because it's a Jewish voice, but they may come in because it's the Jewish voice that really knows what it's talking about, and they want to be part of things that really know what it's talking about, so to speak, or what they're talking about. And I think that's an interesting thing. The other thing I want to mention is that I see more and more young Jews who are self-conscious about their wealth, about their privilege, about class. They have a class consciousness to them, and they don't necessarily know what to do with that. And they wonder exactly how the Jewish community uses its privilege when it comes to our voice, and our voice, for example, around Israel, but maybe not our voice about food stamps, although I think we do a good job about advocating for those kinds of things too. And I think those are opportunities to educate young Jews about the way that the voice of the Jewish community can be powerful around issues that matter. One other topic within that, we see the decline in the birth rate of the Jewish community, particularly for non-Orthodox Jews. And something that I find fascinating, I manage a team of staff who work in Israel and are Israeli, as well as a team in the States. And my Israeli staff benefit from wonderful family-friendly policies that the government mandates. And most families today, and most Jewish families today that are not Orthodox, I can't speak for Orthodox, are two-income families. And the lack of family-friendly policies that our government is not providing and that businesses are not providing is something that's on the mind of young people. And so when we ask about the birth rate and we ask about how do we engage young people on issues that matter, that's something that could matter for advocacy purposes in the US that also would allow us to talk about, let's take best practices from Israel, and it could increase some pride in what Israel does and make it a best practice on something. And I think there are opportunities there. And I also am a little fearful about one additional thing, which is the rise of the ultra-Orthodox. Because the ultra-Orthodox in some contexts in America have created their own communities here that are pushing out or are trying to push out, this has been in the Forward, it's been in the Jewish Week, other people who are living there and that are trying to take congressional power and use it for the benefit of their minority interests. That's worrying. I think we should be concerned about that because perceptions about Jews as being part of the regular society will start to shift if people are hearing that African American children aren't getting special ed because people in Kiryas Joel decided that they need to have their schools the way that they have them. So I think we have to also think about the implications of the rise of the Haredi community in America.
It's usually not my stock and trade to be championing ultra-Orthodoxy, but let me just say a couple of words of clarification here. The major hope for transformation within the Haredi community lies primarily on the issue of economics. In other words, that one of the differences between American ultra-Orthodoxy and Israeli ultra-Orthodoxy is that in America people do work for a living. And in order to work for a living, you need to undergo some kind of training or some kind of experience that exposes you to broader currents. Right now, the mindset, the intellectual mindset within the ultra-Orthodox community basically can be described as living in America rather than living as part of America. And that leads in some of its more extreme formulations to things like Kiryas Yoel, which is really a ghetto in the city, so to speak, an island in the city. My sense is among the ultra-Orthodox generally is that once you leave Kiryas Yoel or leave the precincts of Satmar, the recognition of the need to earn a living. As a result, the need to attend a place like Touro College, which actually succeeded precisely on these grounds, opens the door to greater understanding, greater acknowledgement that there are other people in the world and that there are other interests in the world. So that in some respects, there's some tension between authority in the ultra-Orthodox community, which is lodged in a very small group of men, exclusively men, who are Talmudical specialists, and the mass base, which has the daily needs that we all need of having to pay your bills, find a place of residence, and somehow make your way in a complicated society. So if there is grounds, I don't at all disagree with your reasons for concern, because what the study does indicate, this is one part of the study I'm not fully persuaded of, but I find it particularly challenging, is the study indicates that in the Orthodox population, 2/3 are ultra-Orthodox and only 1/3 is modern Orthodox. Now, I shouldn't be all that surprised because the birth rate, again, comes into play. The modern Orthodox usually have 3 children per family. The ultra-Orthodox, you're talking 7, 8, 9 children per family. So on the one hand, I shouldn't be that surprised. On the other hand, I didn't think ultra-Orthodoxy existed outside the precincts of New York, Baltimore, and Los Angeles. If the study is fully accurate here, it projects a trajectory that we should be deeply concerned about. My only resolution of it would be the hope, and perhaps it's more hope than anything else, that economics will necessitate a great deal of change.
When you take the data of the Pew Report, what do you see its effect on the future of institutions of American Jewry? How will it impact, which institutions will wax and which will wane?
It's an excellent question, Joseph. The institutional side of things does largely depend upon numbers. If you don't have a critical mass of Jews engaged, your institution's not going to survive. This ranges from day schools to Jewish community centers to national defense organizations. And each one is going to cope on it with different ways. But if you're looking at at what the data indicate, it suggests that American Jewry is going in 2 directions at the same time. There's a percentage of American Jews, unfortunately much too small, that is Jewishly more active, more enriched than at any moment in Jewish history. You have a much larger percentage that is Jewishly indifferent. The struggle, and I think the real tragedy of the Pew Report, and not that the report is a tragedy, but the tragedy emanating from it, is what my friend Steve Cohen calls the collapse of the middles of Jewish life. It's the middles that have sustained Jewish institutions. To put it into simple language, the Orthodox cannot sustain pro-Israel activity by themselves. They can't sustain day schools by themselves. They require a much broader base of support. If you have a congregation of 800 families, you may only have 200 that are really active, that are part of your core, but they can't survive without the 600 who are the middles, who are basically saying, yeah, I'm a member of the congregation, I'll support it, but I don't want to be all that active. As that middle declines, that will endanger heavily the core and the institutions that the core requires. So in that sense, again, this is one of the, I think, sobering implications of the report. We have a Jewish community that is the most organized in Jewish history. It's the envy of the Gentile world. On the other hand, Jewish institutions need to ask themselves, what are they there for? There's a great movie that I recommend to all of you. It came out about 2 years ago. It's called The Reader. It's primarily about a German woman who loved literacy and reading. At the end of the movie, her advocate, her attorney, comes to Park Avenue, where he meets a woman who's an author of Holocaust literature, and he asks her, is there an organization for Jewish literacy? A Jewish organization for literacy. That's what my client was most interested in. The author responds, there must be. There's a Jewish organization for everything. Now, I put that in context and say what she's saying on the one hand, as an author of Holocaust literature, I'm very proud of the way we've rebuilt. But I'm not sure that every Jewish organization has a distinctive purpose that needs to be maintained. And that, I think, is what will be challenged by this decline of the middles.
I was at a Reform meeting of all Reform congregations where 5,000 people 2.5 months ago were at this meeting in San Diego where Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who was a rabbi at Westchester Reform Temple in this area, proposed a way of trying to energize temple youth and people who are not necessarily even members of temples. And this was just one of, he called it audacious hospitality. And what he said was that we were going to do a whole number of these things. This was only one. This was a weekend of things trying to combat what appears to be the way the Pew Report indicates Judaism is going to go. And I was wondering if this hasn't been mentioned, if you're aware of it, and if there are other things that are being proposed like this, rather than the defeatist attitude that I've heard so far tonight.
Okay, I don't know if it's the kind of question that demands a full lecture in itself. If you want to come back tomorrow night, I'd be happy to start over. I'm very well aware of Rabbi Jacobs' speech. It garnered a great deal of attention, a great many headlines, and frankly, a great deal of controversy. Let me focus a bit more specifically. He was engaged, I think quite correctly, as someone who was able to energize congregational life. And in that respect, yes, he's brought to it a new spirit, a new verve, a new sense of can-do. In other words, a new sense of accomplishment and achievement. And in that respect, the Reform movement has chosen someone who would be focused more on the congregational enrichment than, say, in the past, was focused more on national politics. That part of it, I think there's a great deal of cheering for him. Second, there's also no question that the Reform movement remains the largest of the movements. So the fact that it gets 5,000, 6,000 people to a national convention, again, that's something I know AJC cannot do. And I'm quite envious of the fact that, yes, that it has dedicated activists that are willing to go out wherever that convention took place, I think it was Chicago, and make their voices heard. All that needs to be underscored and it deserves communal praise. The core of the controversy is what we referred to earlier. It's a normative controversy. Namely, should our attitude towards mixed marriage be something that we encourage the language of endogamy and conversion, even as we make room for those who are mixed married? Or, and this is the real problem with the speech, does the language of making room, of outreach, necessitate silence, neutrality, or saying nothing at all on the twin values of endogamy and conversion? Rabbi Jacobs has come under severe criticism from within the Reform movement, let alone from people like myself, who find that there really requires a threefold policy approach, which is that of continue to promote endogamy, encourage conversion of the non-Jewish spouse, in the absence of conversion, make sure that the institution is welcoming in the hope that it will lead to a more creative and intensive Jewish life. I heard only the third of those themes, as if the other two should be overwhelmed or set by the sidelines. Again, this is not myself speaking alone. Shortly after the Pew Report came out, Steve Cohen, Jack Wertheimer, and myself convened a meeting of 24 Jewish opinion leaders. And the common denominator behind all of us was that we cannot afford to give up either the language of endogamy or the language of conversion. So that was my disappointment with the speech.
A few years ago, an organization called the Curriculum Initiative, which was a program that worked in private non-Jewish schools to bring Jewish culture, Jewish identity, Jewish learning to those students, closed its doors. But when they closed their doors, they put together a really interesting report. And I was struck with this, and I'm still trying to play this around in my head. What they did was their annual retreat of Jewish learning for high school students, very bright high school students who go to top private schools. In 2009, they said, we're going to open this up to leaders of other affinity groups. What we mean by that is the GLBT club on campus, the African American Pride Club on campus. And 1/5 of the students that showed up to that seminar were not in any way Jewish, but understood the idea of being a minority, having a particularistic identity, and were proud of that, and that's part of why they were part of another school club. And what they found was that they doubled the number of Jewish students that came to that program that year. And I really think this is something we need to understand, is that I'm not suggesting, and I really understand all the data around the fact that entirely Jewish social circles will certainly lead to in-marriage, will certainly lead to somebody having a very full Jewish life, but it's not a reality of living in America. And I think we can encourage young people to have Jewish friends and help them understand what does it mean to have shared stories, a shared brotherhood. We see, many, many young people who don't ever step foot into any kind of synagogue, who decide to join AJCapos, the Jewish fraternity. What's that about? Let's think about that, and let's deepen that experience for somebody that does something like AJCapos. Let's give them the opportunity to do Jewish learning during those encounters. Let's build on it, which is really part of the point of what I'm saying with Pride. And I think there are a lot of interesting programs. There was a great, and it's a one-off, but there was Sukkah City, which happened, in Manhattan, a really interesting competition around Sukkot. It was something that energized people to understand halakha, to look into it, to see the creativity that exists in our culture. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi of England, who is actually here in the US, I believe, for the year, when he spoke at the GA this year, he really just talked about what was one of his main strategies of engaging and re-energizing the British Jewish community. And I don't know the data, but he says that it worked. He had a number of things that he did. He certainly focused on day schools and summer camps, which I think are things that matter in our community too. But he also said, I'm going to get onto the secular radio every week and be a personality for the wider British community, because when I show that Jewish ideas are meaningful across all boundaries, that really sticks. And I think that non-Jewish spouses also need the opportunity to walk in and get those opportunities to see what it means for Jewish ideas to resonate for them. And I think there's more that can be done before we push endogamy and conversion as the first two things that they need to do in order to walk in the doors.
Well, I want to thank the two of you. I think that all of us have really benefited from your knowledge and from your experience in your study of the abuse study.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.